and he creates his own offensive chance with that motor.
Krejci to Coyle, and the Leafs are mulched again!
Hey everybody, welcome to NESN Bruins Podcast. I'm NESN.com's Mike Cole, joined as always by NESN.com's Logan Mullen. Logan, how are we?
We are good, Mike. Thank you for asking. How are you?
I can't complain. Well, I can complain, but really at this point, where is that getting any of us?
Nowhere, actually.
Yeah. We are back as promised with the Bruins Podcast this week. We will continue an unofficial series that we've begun here, is just kind of taking I keep saying taking stock, but that's what we're doing, is kind of just digging into the positional groups. We've already crossed off the goalies. We crossed off the defensemen last week, so we'll get into the forward groupings this week and kind of look at what they have in the cupboard now and what's moving forward. So, but before we do that, we'll do our our weekly check-in of where things stand amid this coronavirus pause. The news, I guess, not a ton this week, but the NHL came out and said the self-quarantine period will continue through April, so that's not a huge surprise there. That's kind of just a continual kick of the can. Let's see, Dr. Fauci on Snapchat.
You know, when Dr. Fauci's optimistic, I got to say, that sparked my optimism a little bit too, because he kind of came out of the clouds and said that, like, he was under no obligation to do that.
Yeah, and I also wonder, so he came out on Snap, what is that thing called? Snapchat?
Yes, it's a Snapchat series or something like that, but it's Snapchat on YouTube. Yeah,
it was on YouTube, but he said he sounded very optimistic that sports could return this summer.
Yeah, I listened to and it wasn't that long of a chat that they posted, but I mean, he didn't say it with much reservation. He was basically like, yeah, slap him in a hotel, only let him go to him from the arena, test him all the time, and we're on our way.
I will say it sounded like he was very, and actually the interviewer asked him about baseball, so I think he might have been talking solely about baseball.
So that's the one thing, yeah.
And I will say, I think we might have mentioned this in weeks past, if you're to power rank the three sports that are kind of in limbo right now, taking out football, because they're kind of still a few months away from having to make a real hard decision. But among baseball, basketball, and hockey, I would say hockey has the toughest road to hoe in terms of getting back. So I think what Fauci said, I think he was mostly talking about baseball anyway, but I think you have to kind of expect greater hurdles to clear for NHL, especially as we get into the summer months. So I don't really put a whole lot into what Fauci said earlier this week about that. So I don't know. Maybe that's me being negative. But
I guess it would be determined based on how far the NHL wants to push the season. Like if you're talking about baseball getting underway at some point this summer, like I guess you could ramp up hockey really quickly in mid-July, early August. But like at that point, what are you doing? Like you're just mortgaging the future.
Well, that's a good segue, because we've done this a few times as well, checking in with the TSN group, their insider trading. So Pierre LeBrun he had the most concrete information this week when he said he was kind of kicking around, asking people in the know when the NHL thought they might have to make a decision. Like, what's the longest, not just a return, when's the longest they can go into the spring or even into the summer before making a decision on whether or not they will try to extend this season. And he said he talked to two governors. One said late May, and another said mid-June. And teams getting back together just to start practicing doesn't seem close in sight, he said. So there's still a ways to go before we get any sort of thing. And this is another hurdle that they have to clear, is that you're going to be bringing guys back from Europe, so they're going to have to quarantine for 14 days. Most likely, I would assume.
They can even get in the country, too.
Right, yeah, that's another point, too. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, especially, I don't know, are there Russians who went home? And, Russia's now starting to see, finally, from what we know, an uptick in cases as well. So you're going to have to sort out a lot of those geopolitical things as well. So that's the thing. That's what makes this so tricky and so hard to figure out, is you have to add at least, 2 weeks onto everything. It's been the same way in terms of tracking cases and deaths. Is we're behind, 2 weeks behind on everything. And it's the same thing with this, is that you have to build in extra time for guys to get back, quarantine, get their legs, practice, et cetera, et cetera. Drager on the same thing said the number one concern among people in the game when they get back is going to be the injury. Number two is going to be the energy level, the intensity level. There's a bunch of, who knows what's going to look like. I think, I guess we can do our weekly check-in in terms of our confidence meters. Why don't you go first, 1 to 10, with 10 being your highest confidence?
I think I've been hovering at a 4 the last few weeks, and I would say I'm like a 5 this week. I'm a little more confident now than I have been before for two reasons. One, because there was that, I think it was Pierre LeBrun who said that they're willing to push the start of next season. In the past, that hadn't really been much of a thing. And so if getting the rest of this season done was predicated on them not moving the upcoming campaign, then there would have been no way to do it. But now, if they actually believe that they could wait until November or December to start the following season, I can see them waiting until early July, I guess. Like if they're able to get training camps and whatnot going on June 1st with an eye on games starting in July, like they can make that work. So I'm not significantly more confident that they're coming back, but because Bettman has been beating that drum so much that he wants to hand out the Stanley Cup this year, all that crap, I think they're really going to try and find a way.
Interesting. So I think I was a 4 last week, a 3 the week before. I think I'm down to like a 2.5.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I've read too much. And this is, I know people might find this part of the podcast boring. I don't know. But I feel it's very therapeutic. I like to get some things out that I've been reading too much, I think. And I read I don't know, did you see the Catch the Sports Illustrated article this week about
which one?
What's that?
I said which one?
It was about just like the whole thing was centered around it's going to be so much more difficult than anyone can even imagine to bring sports back. And so like part of my thing is that I feel like I'm taking a smart approach to this entire situation, not just as it pertains to hockey, but the pandemic in general, and trying to read as much stuff from smart people as I can. And that's mostly doctors who are more pragmatic and probably a little more conservative with their decision making. And it spooked me into like thinking I'm buying this thing, the Harvard thing, that we're not going to have anything until 2022, let alone like we're just going to I'm assuming I'm just going to sit in this room for the next 2 years. So if that's going to be the case, I don't see how hockey's going to come back. I understand that, like, there are just as many powerful, important decision makers who have a much higher stake in the economy and the financial aspects of things. That probably will balance it out. But this is just a weekly check-in on me, and it's really more of a getting me on the psychiatrist couch. Right now where I stand, I don't have a ton of confidence in hockey. Basketball, baseball, different situation, but hockey, I just think there are too many hurdles, especially when you get into do you want to play hockey in the summer? I guess it's better than nothing, but at a certain point that seems difficult. Yeah,
and I mean, my level of confidence that comes back doesn't necessarily run concurrent with what I think is right. Like, I think they'd be wise now just to pack it in and say, let's start this thing back up in September and cross our fingers. But I think, as has become increasingly clear pretty much every week, the president of the United States wants to move heaven and earth to get sports back.
Right.
And so it may not be the right decision, but it's kind of it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission type thing, where it's like, you know what, let's just lay out a plan, roll the dice, hope no one gets sick, and be on our merry way.
Within an hour of our podcast, Trump is meeting with, I think basically another round of not commissioners or whatever. I think he's like going back to the sports
team owners, some team
owners, right? Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Mark Cuban and Jerry Jones, people in power.
Yeah, I think Vince McMahon might be involved in that again as well. So that's interesting. But yeah, so I actually it's a good point. You sit there say you might not want it to, but I'm actually on the other. I think in terms of my expectations, I'm pretty doom and gloom. But in terms of what I think they should do, I'm actually kind of leaning toward. And I don't want to be outing myself as a Neanderthal here, but
that's sailed.
Let's go. Let's find a way to make it work. And I don't want to downplay what most of the country is going through right now, but I think I don't know. Maybe it's just as somebody who works in sports. I think there are a lot of people on the internet or wherever in the comments who are downplaying the importance of sports in this country. And I don't know. Maybe that's pie in the sky. Maybe that's I have my priorities mixed up. But if there's a way to get it done, I hope they do it.
I have no way to prove this, but I mean, the weather's about to get a lot nicer, and people are probably going to start relaxing on actually socially distancing. So maybe sports is a better way to keep people from, utter jackassery and being outside all the time and with
good point
and whatnot. So
yeah, I hope it comes back too. Obviously, but I think there'll be some interesting conversations too if they decide hockey comes back. And this is for down the road, but talking about the idea of I've just been watching a ton of old games, especially on NESN with our re-airs of the Bruins 2011 playoff run. Just the idea, we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but playoff hockey without a crowd that's one thing I've realized is like you start to come to grips with the idea that they're going to be playing sports in front of empty arenas and stadiums. That's going to be so bizarre.
I was reading the story about Kirk Cousins talking about how he might actually like playing without fans. And one thing he mentioned is that during practices, they pump in crowd noise.
Yeah.
I wonder if they'd ever get to the point where they'd pump in crowd noise.
So getting way off tap. I was watching Taiwanese baseball this morning and the noise, I don't know if this is the way it always is for Taiwanese baseball. The noise never stopped. There was always music.
Right.
It sounded like there was a DJ in the background talking at times. It was wild.
I mean, the Garden at times during the playoffs was like library quiet.
Right.
It's like if you imagine that, it's just a 4-0 walloping or something like that, or the home team's getting killed and they still just have the crowd noise firing away.
Or on the other end, like imagine, a seventh game of a playoff series going end to end, that helter-skelter type of hockey where you're getting, stand on your head saves at each end. And it's just crickets. It's going to be nuts.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about actual hockey
right.
on the ice and such. As we talked about at the top, we're continuing our look at the Bruins position group by position group. We're on to the forwards this week. And you and I were kind of just chatting before we came on. There's not a lot to say here.
No.
This is, again, you have the best line in hockey with the Bergeron line up top. Arguably one of the, if not the best, one of the 3 or 4 best in the entire league. David Krejci, one of the more underrated players in the last 10 to 15 years in the NHL. The moves that they've made recently, whether it's the re-signing Charlie Coyle to a contract extension, the trade for Andre Kasha, like there's good depth here, good talent. I mean, they are pretty set, and they're pretty set for at least a couple more years.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's no, Krejci will be up after next season, but they already took care of that situation with the Charlie Coyle extension. And, they have center depth in Providence between Jack Studnicka and Trent Frederick. And by all accounts, Trent Frederick's offensive game has really come around. I don't know if a second line center is, in the cards for him, but if David Krejci decides to go elsewhere, or, I don't know, throw a screwball at us and retire, I don't know. That's a guy with a fairly long injury history. Then I don't think the Bruins are going to be totally up the creek with their situation down the middle. And having Charlie Coyle, where you can use him in any sort of middle six role, and he'll probably be a higher end guy there. There's not a huge sense of urgency to take care of, I guess, by signing Coyle, Don Sweeney did himself a lot of favors in that his list of priorities and contingency plans that he needs to lay out are relatively few, because things can't really get to a nuclear situation where all of a sudden, Bergeron and Krejci are gone. They have absolutely no organizational depth or anything like that. So, yeah, the forward situation, for the most part, at least in the top 6, looks like it's going to be intact for another couple of years.
Yeah, they're in a good spot. I'm just looking at it real quick. You might have mentioned this too, but I kind of zoned out because that's what I do. But Nordstrom's the only UFA in that entire group at the NHL level right now, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe you're correct.
Right. So, I mean, even, you got RFAs, Bjork's an RFA, and DeBrusk is the big one. And again, it's hard to, we kind of talked about this with the defenseman, especially with the Torrey Krug thing. It's hard to project what the salary cap is going to look like. A lot of that might hinge on our first conversation of this this episode with, how much they get in terms of revenue for the playoffs. And that's another thing too. We'll have to figure out who knows what revenue looks like with the playoffs. Yeah. I don't even. It's just there's so many hurdles they have to clear before we can really dig into that. But in terms, like I said, in terms of free agent class, not a lot there. Just Nordstrom is a UFA, who is a pretty much to your.
He's not expendable. That would be a tough loss because he is a fantastic skater and a fantastic penalty killer. But I think by them giving Chris Wagner the extension that they did, they pretty much said, we like our depth. I mean, they're chock full of guys that can play bottom six roles, whether that's Trent Frederick. They still have Anton Bleed with them. They can put Nick Ritchie down there. So not that the loss of Nordstrom and the skill set that he brings wouldn't hurt, but they do have internal options to where they could let him walk. Conversely, he's not going to make much more than $1 million, right? Like he's making 1.1 right now. And if they have the cap space, why would you not bring him back? Like I doubt there's going to be a team out there that throws absurd money at him.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason they don't bring him back is Par Lindholm or something like that.
Right, and I believe they have Par Lindholm for next year too.
They do, yeah. They've got him less money.
He's been a fantastic signing too. He's great defensively. Sean Corrali's gotten those opportunities on the wing, and he's proven that he can actually – he doesn't need to just be pigeonholed into a center role. So maybe going forward you roll with the Corrali, Lindholm, Wagner line, and you could be in a far worse circumstance.
Yeah, it's nuts. I'm just looking at it, and just the more you look at it, to have your entire top six and really top 8, I know that's a weird way of putting it, locked up for next year. I think you start breaking it down, and maybe there's a need on the right wing, probably third line right winger, depending on what you get it.
But yeah,
but you got enough guys coming up where you can give somebody a shot in camp, or you can go out and make a signing. They went 1 for 2 with their off-season forward signings, whether it was Ritchie and Lindholm, and Lindholm obviously worked out, but maybe there's a $1.5 million winger out there that you can go get and try to fit under the cap or whatever. So yeah, it's a very small problem and a very small hole to fill, relatively speaking.
Right. And every time I think about, and this is kind of changing the subject a little bit, but the Torrey Krug situation, I always, and again, we don't know what the salary cap's going to be, especially if they cancel the season or they have to play without fans, which is, again, looking increasingly likely. But I don't think Jake DeBrusk is going to get as much as people probably expect he would. And you talk about guys who would be put in a tougher spot by the season being canceled. He is certainly one of them because he's had such an up and down year and because he wasn't the same last season after the concussion against Tampa. I'm looking at Bruins stats tweeted out some comparisons for guys who are averaging about the points per game, getting their first RFA contracts. It's like Kevin Fiala, $3 million a year. Pavel Buchnevich, 3.25. Jacob Vrana, 3.35. Andreas Janssen, 3.4. I don't think DeBrusk is going to make some sort of cap crippling salary where you're paying him north of $4 million. I think he's going to fall very comfortably right in that $3 to $3.5 million range. And then if that's the case and the cap's at 81.5, then you're probably working with $17 million to take care of your backup goalie Bjork, Carson Kuhlman, Chara, Krug, and Grzelcyk.
It'd be tough, but not
but not impossible.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, they're looking at 22 million in cap space.
And Grzelcyk's another guy that it's kind of weird to assess what the market is for him, right? He hasn't put up a ton of points, but he's a fantastic two-way defenseman. If Krug walks, then he's probably your number one power play guy, but he moves the puck well, he defends responsibly. So it's what's the market for a guy that is in that sort of position that's still an RFA? Sweeney historically has done a good job of getting guys to take below market value, and he might get put in that spot again.
I will say, if the league does not resume and return for this season, Sweeney's first press conference is going to be fascinating in terms of but then again, who knows? I mean, that's the thing. I was going to say, it'd be fascinating in terms of what his offseason strategy would be like, because I wouldn't blame him if there is an inclination there to just run it all back and be like, we owe it to this group, we owe it to this core to bring back pretty much the same exact roster. It's doable, it's feasible, it's not going to kill us. But, so I guess in that regard, if they assume that they're going to start again in September, October, even November of next year, you probably do that and just kind of take what you can and go back with that same roster. But I also wonder too, like how roster building changes when you don't know whether you're going to play next season either. So there's a lot.
Well, and that goes back to what we talked about, how we might see a lot of guys take 1-year deals, and that may benefit the Bruins in the short term, at least at the blue line. Like, I don't think the deal that Jake DeBrusk gets is going to be altered that much by what does or does not happen with the rest of the season. But the way they approach other guys is certainly going to be impacted by what happens with Torrey Krug. And if all of a sudden he has to take a 1-year deal below market value to get himself back to, when the salary cap expands a little bit more and there's a bit more normalcy in life, then that will most certainly impact the offseason approach, not just for him, but league-wide.
Yeah. So that's something. Anything else on the forwards? I mean, they've got a good group of young guys, I guess, too. I think it's actually pretty similar to the defense, with defense core, where it's like a lot of guys, not one real shining example of like a can't miss prospect, but a lot of low ceiling at least, or high floor, relatively low ceiling guys. But it's also, you have no idea, what. Because that's the thing. When you have a team that has this many veterans on it, it's like, what if you haven't had a chance to see those younger players? And that's actually kind of a good thing if you think about it. But at a certain point, you're going to run out of time with these guys.
And that's another situation where the Bruins not being able to finish out the regular season is going to hurt them in some respects, because considering how much they were running away with the Atlantic Division, the fact that they probably were going to have their postseason spot and place atop the Atlantic Division locked up by like mid to late March, they were going to have a couple weeks where they could trot out a lot of guys. Like Zach Senyshyn's about to be an RFA. Wouldn't you like to know a little bit more what you have with him? And Carson Kuhlman, he's going to be an RFA again as well. Like, get an extended look with him. Jack Studnicka probably gets called up. Anton Bleed probably plays a little bit more. Those are things that if they have to just hit the ground running in the postseason, you're not necessarily going into the offseason sight unseen with some of these guys, but your ability to evaluate them at the NHL level obviously is different. Like, do you want to take your pick. Do you want to let Joakim Nordstrom walk and then all of a sudden Trent Frederick doesn't pan out and, Anton Bleed's not an NHL player and you're like, well, shoot, now we're a little bit of a mess in an area that historically has been a position of strength with us because we didn't want to re-sign a guy for $1 million because we thought someone else might work out. So
yeah, it's a very good way for you to get some more.
That's the spin zone right there.
Jesus, despite the fact that playing the most unimportant position in the sport, but that's all right.
Strong disagree, but
okay, sure, yeah. Well, that's just because you've been brainwashed by watching the Bruins for the last 20 years, where it's been having a fourth line is the most important thing in roster building, apparently.
I don't know how spicy this is. We overstate the Merlot line. I've come to remember.
That's a terrible take. It's just a bad take.
They were fine. But people conveniently forget that Sean Thornton was healthy scratch for like half of the final two series of the 2011 run.
Yeah, but like when he went back in, like he had like 2 or 3 shifts that were like the best of his entire life that set the tone.
Yeah, that's fair. It is funny how ice time has changed over the last few years. Like, we've been doing these Bruins Encore, so I've been down the rabbit hole with some of these things. Like, Sean Thornton would play like 4.5, 5 minutes a night. And I remember when they were doing that to David Backes last year, being like, what the hell is Cassidy doing? And then it was every single game you have, Sean Thornton's playing 4.5, 5 minutes. Like Daniel Paille on games where there weren't a ton of penalties, he was playing like 6 minutes. Like, that's just kind of unheard of now. My favorite, since we are down the rabbit hole, was game 1 of that cup final. Alain Vigneault played his 4th line. None of those guys played more than 2.5 minutes. No one took more than 4 shifts on his 4th line. It's like, what are you doing? Why even dress them?
Did you get to the bottom of that? I don't remember why.
No, no clue. It was Alex Bolduc who was playing because Manny Malhotra was out and he wasn't ready to come back. He played 1:39. Victor Oreskovich, who Vigneault just hated, played 1:54, and then Jeff Tambellini played 2.5 minutes. So you have to double shift your top 9 guys like pretty much nonstop because you don't trust the 4th line.
Yeah, I mean, that was 9 years ago or whatever, but that's like a lifetime ago. The sport
right
evolved so quickly.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you can't roll for, I mean, that was the thing. The Bruins, like that's
the Blues too. I mean, they got 2 of their 4th line forwards getting popped for suspensions during the Cup final, and it was nary a worry.
Yeah.
You know, they had Alex Steen centering that 4th line, and then it was Sundqvist and the other person escapes my mind, but they were fine. And the same thing with the Bruins. I mean, one of their best lines during that cup run was the Nordstrom, Achari, Corrali, Wagner combination that they kept using.
The irony, too, is about the 11 Bruins is like Julian got roasted, sometimes rightfully so, for rolling 4 lines. That was the big joke, is that you like to roll 4 lines and then you're getting 5 minutes of it. But, I mean, it's the Stanley Cup final against a much more talented team. Supposedly,
Ivan Barbashev. That's who it was.
Yeah. None of it's surprising, but it is just funny to look back on. So, I have enjoyed that. Maybe we'll have to do that. Maybe next week we'll kind of do a little 2011 blast from the past.
We'll look back
to celebrate the end of the first round of Bruins Encores. Hopefully, we're not going to be doing Bruins Encores much longer on NESN. That's my hope. Is that we'll have
Bruins live.
Yes, exactly.
Bruins first set.
Bruins main feature.
Yeah.
But no, actually, I do that one last tangent. I hope that I don't want this to cost people jobs in the long run, but I hope networks, sports networks, start leaning on the classics a little more frequently. It is funny. It's like, where'd you get like MLB notoriously does not allow their stuff online. All of a sudden, we're just putting out games from 2001, and it's just, oh yeah.
Yeah. Tonight on NESN, we have a Red Sox Rangers game from June of 2006.
Yeah, give it to me. I love it. Just play the entire 1999 Red Sox season.
That was a great season.
99, 95. Oh, love it. Same thing with the Bruins. Yeah, give me 1994 Bruins. You know, I'll take that all day. 92, 93. Oh, Cusick and Sanderson. Just give it to me. So, all right, that's all I got. I don't know if you have anything else.
No, let's get out of here.
We're kind of in our holding pattern, so we'll be back again next week to discuss an undecided topic. We'll kind of figure out. Oh, you did do some. You've done some interviews that will start rolling out as well. So
that is in the pipeline. Interviews have been done with Jack Becker from Michigan, Jack Ashan, the college free agent defenseman from St. Cloud that they signed, and Johnny Beecher, their first-round pick last year. So those are ready to go, but in due course, those will be released. So certainly something to look forward to other than us just yammering away.
Becker and Beecher is something I will confuse for.
They played on a line together, too, at the beginning of the year because they're both at Michigan.
Right, yeah. That's going to confuse
Bruins
me.
Prospects whose initials are JB.
For the entirety of their careers, I will mess that up. So
yeah, confused the hell out of me.
Yeah, great work, Logan. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you then.